Okay, S.D. Dean is spent his almost total life studying Kingsport history, fossils, and archaeology and paleontology. I go back 30 years. I saw 4 of his programs, 2 for my school, the students, and the PTA, and 2 for the Kingsport Optimist Club. And I was just so amazed and excited after each program. So you will feel this same feeling I had 30 years ago after you hear S.D. Dean and see his presentation. So 2 things go back in my mind 30 years ago. One was in Long Island, all the students there call the Big Rock. You will know it maybe as the Eastman Rock that sticks out 17 feet past the cliff there, just as you cross over the river. S.D. dug a ditch 12 feet wide, 12 feet deep, 80 feet long. And out of that, he spent, 80, let's see, what was the date on that? 79 and 80. He dug tons. How many tons of dirt did you go through? 56? 256 tons he sifted out. He got 80 to 90,000 artifacts. And he's going to tell you about the Indians he found in there also. And then in 1986, the Patrick Henry Dam was drained. And how many remember that when they drained the Patrick Henry Dam? Collins does it? Dr. Young? Yeah, good. Okay. He took it on himself. He checked with TVA. TVA checked their own stuff, but he checked outside of the TVA area. He found 108 Indian campsites. In addition to that, of course, the water had eroded everything away. He could find their fireplaces, their cooks of fire rings, and flints where they'd made their equipment and stuff like that. He found 14 Ice Age sites, which, 10 to 18,000 years ago. So S.D. Dean got the Tennessee Division of Geology and Archaeology Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006. He has found all types of fossils, 5 or 6 different fossils that were much further down south in the Kingsport area. He knows more about the fossils than any other person around in this area. See, and he's worked with the museums, Carnegie, Smithsonian, East Tennessee State, and University of Tennessee. And every 2 months he works out there. They know him well out at the fossil site. He comes there and helps them identify fossils and unknown things that people bring in. Okay, S.D. Dean is our speaker. All right, S.D.
Appreciate you asking me to come. Ray got a hold of me a couple of weeks ago, and trying to figure out exactly what to talk about. And I think what I'm going to do is really try to get it within the city limits of Kingsport, because there's so much work that's been done. Appalachian Caverns, Linville Cave, we could talk about that, and sites down below the BAE. But I'm going to try to keep it real local so that you'll know what's right here in town, basically. So the first thing I guess I need to talk about is that some of the things that you might know about archaeology or the prehistory sometimes is not always the truth. And I guess I need to bring that up first. As an example, if I had an airhead up here and asked you what culture, group, or tribe it belonged to, and it came out of Kingsport, probably 80% of the people in the room, or 90%, are going to say Cherokee Indian. And the reason for that is the Cherokees had a real rich and vivid history. They were here when the early settlers came in. So our concept is Cherokee Indian. That's what we see. To an archaeologist, the Cherokee were in here as a hunting grounds, but they represent 3% of the time that prehistoric people's been in this area. 3%. And that just kind of blows a lot of people away. But when you look all the way back to the Ice Age, 13,000 years ago, probably when people first walked in, the last 400 years is only 3% of that. Chris Rodney, which is a well-known archaeologist, this is what he stated in a report that he wrote. I would agree with others who have suggested that it was only at the end of the 17th century that there formed in southern Appalachia a southern entity specifically identified as Cherokee. So again, the only reason I wanted to bring that out is because just to show you that prehistory goes way back, way beyond the Cherokee Indian. I'd like to divide the program into 3 parts because he said that once somebody told me to be out here maybe about 11 o'clock. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction. I'm going to show you some slides of some work that's been done in Kingsport. And then I'll leave room at the end for some questions so that I won't be stopping during the presentation, and I think it's going to drag it out a lot longer. The definition for archaeology, I think, has even changed. I know 40 or 50 years ago, if you look it up, it was something like a study of ancient man through his tools and his weapons. And today, if you look up the definition, it's more like a study of extinct ways of life where we incorporate the environment, the behavior patterns, and the artifacts. As an example, an Eskimo in Alaska today, harpoon fishing in the ice and so forth, needs an entirely different type toolkit to survive in that environment than someone living in East Tennessee. So the artifacts is just the result of whatever living style they've chosen. The 3 main aims of archaeology, what we look for, first is to establish a chronological sequence of events and dates as they happened in our prehistory. Our history, pretty well known. We know recently we had Vietnam War, Korean War, World War II, and so forth. What about the backward extension of our history? What about 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, and so forth? So that's what archaeology is involved in, is the backward extension. The second thing we would look for is try to give us a glimpse of ways of life that no longer exist. In some places, not locally, but some places, complete villages have been reconstructed. So you can go in, look where Temple Mound may have been with a high priest sitting above the whole population and so forth. The third thing is to give us some understanding of why cultures have changed over time. 3,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago, in a 1,000-year frame there, we had the invention of pottery, or the introduction or invention, we don't know if it was brought in, of pottery or ceramics. We had the bow and arrow during that period of time. We had domesticated plants during that period of time. Also had domestication of animals. The society went from hunter-gatherer prior to that to an agricultural community. So what brought this on? That's the third thing we'd look for. To get the information, we have to go on what is known as a site. The definition for a site would be any place that has been modified and or occupied by prehistoric people. They didn't necessarily have to occupy a place to be an archaeological site. If an Indian came into an area and picked up a chunk of flint and started knocking chips off of it, he's modifying that piece of ground. The state of Tennessee recognizes 10 artifacts as a minimum to get a state site number for a permanent site. So, and a site could be a lot of things. It could be a cave, rock shelter, could be a quarry where they quarried their flint. It could be a burial mound, a large village, a seasonal camp. It could just be so many things that could be be classified as a prehistoric site. Some of the things I want to show you. I found some literature yesterday of, let me get over here. I found some literature I dug out yesterday of Kingsport. It's things that have been written and published and documented, and I just want to share some of those with you. I'll start a little bit up above Kingsport and go just a little bit below, then I'm going to come back and do what's in town. In 1968, I dug with Carnegie Museum on a site on Patrick Henry Lake. They did a book on it in '78. I found Indian artifacts. It's a small cave, and Indian artifacts in it. Also found giant armadillo. These are Ice Age animals, and they got a date on it of 19,100 years old using bone collagen. Found giant armadillo, found part of a giant beaver, which they said the body size was like the size of a black bear, probably 5 to 6 feet long, 3 to 3 foot tail. Found an extinct jaguar, probably weighed 450 pounds. Today's female jaguar of Central America probably weighs 250. Found extinct deer called Sangamona. Also found peccary, flat-headed peccary, and tapir. The tapirs is a different species, but it's the same animal they found out at Gray. So we're starting up on Patrick Henry Lake, and we're coming this way. In 1832, S.H. Long was cutting a road through Cooks Valley, and he ran up on a mastodon skeleton, which is on Fall Creek. So we're still coming a little bit further down this way, but not all of this particular skeleton was taken out of the ground. Part of it was left in the ground because it was deteriorating, and he left part of the tusk and so forth in the ground. And actually, that's a project that kind of been looking at lately to see if I can maybe locate where that's at. He gives us a description. I'm hoping I can get pretty close to it. When I did the survey on Patrick Henry Lake in 1986, I found 5 shell pits where they had clam bakes there, and some people from the University of Tennessee came up, and we did. I didn't have permission to do any digging on TVA property, so people from the University of Tennessee got permission, came up, and we did some testing of those shell pits, and we got 2 dates out there: 4,960 years old and 4,580 years old, and that's right at Fall Creek Bridge in Warriors Path Park. And then the survey I did in 1986, when the lake dropped down to its first time it had been dropped since it was inundated back in the early 50s, TVA actually did a report on that project. So I've got a copy of that report on the Fort Patrick Henry. It's unpublished, so it's not available. It's sitting on their shelf. I don't know why they didn't put it out for the public, but it's not available. And below Kingsport, so we've kind of come down to Eastman now, kind of, to the dam. On the lower side, the nearest thing we have to us is the projects that were done on BAE's property. At that time, it was hosting defense or hosting the ordnance. And a site there, they got a date of 2,343 years old. And there's a report done on that. So now we're in Kingsport. Let's start up at the Eastman Bridge, our John B. Dennis. I dug that, like Ray mentioned, in 1979, 1980. There was a short article that first appeared in the Tennessee Anthropological Association newsletter in 1980. Talks a little bit about kind of what was found, just very briefly. A student, actually she's at the University of Michigan, took some of the pottery out there and did a paper on the on the ceramics out of the rock shelter. Now we're talking right here in Kingsport. I guess everybody here knows where I'm talking about. And a fellow at the University of Tennessee did his master thesis on part of that project that I did over there. He did it mostly on the faunal or the bone material. Some of the things that's interesting about that shelter, it's the deepest shelter that's ever been dug in the state, 12 feet deep. The first thermoluminescence date that was done in the state of Tennessee was done on rocks out of there, that we got dates for a fireplace down about 8 feet in the ground. We also found parts of an extinct fish that it was in the sucker family. No one knew this fish was going extinct, and no one collected any of the bones. And today, the Smithsonian has one skeleton about 90% complete, and there's no complete skeletons of that fish nowhere. I mean, nobody knew it was going extinct. No one collected it. So anyway, out of this particular site, I found like 100 and some different bones, different parts of bones. It's the first archaeological site in Tennessee they found where the fish had actually been used by the prehistoric people. And also there's a little cave up above the rock shelter. I took some dirt out of it and water screened it, and I found a peccary tooth in it, Ice Age peccary. So let's come on down the river in Kingsport, where the Holston, where the sluice, the Horse Creek comes into the sluice. I did a dig there 7 years ago, and a woman at the ETSU did her master's, it's for her honors project. She did a paper on that particular site. We got like 6 or 7 carbon dates off of that particular site there. It's right beside of the Department of Human Services, if you know where that's at. Coming on down the river in Kingsport in 1978, they were getting ready to put in the interstate over Long Island. That was 181, now it's 26. The University of Tennessee came up and did tests on where the piers went in the ground. They took tests to make sure they wasn't disturbing any type of archaeological sites. Well, that is on the historical register, so they had to do some kind of a dig there. They found 2 sites there, 40 SL 8 and 9, and this is the paper that was presented on that. 40, what I just mentioned, 40 is the Tennessee state number for a site. Any site in the state of Tennessee is going to have it's going to be starting with 40. SL, Sullivan County, this is the 8th and 9th sites found. So if you ever see that designation, that's what that means. And then in the 1990s, Joe Benthal from the state of Tennessee Department of Archaeology came up when they were putting the soccer fields on lower Long Island, and he did some work down there and did a paper, and they found 2 different sites there. So there's 2 more sites on the lower end of Long Island. And Tilthammer Shoals, which is there at the island, kind of behind the fish house there. There's another site that's on the the bank there on the island. We call it the Tilthammer Shoals site, and there's a paper been done on it. So you see how much information has been done just right here. I mean, we don't have to go too far to find where a lot of work's been done. Does anybody here want to guess? Let's just say from the Eastman down to Rotherwood, or where BAE starts. Does anyone have an idea of how many dates we've got on this small channel of the river? I'm talking either carbon-14 or thermoluminescence dates that we can date things. Does anybody have a guess? I'm talking about how many different dates we've got just for, one site may have a date, another site, 2. No, that'd be an awful lot of dates for that small of an area. We got 30. We got 30 dates from the Eastman hosting the fence. We got 30 dates that we can chronologically. That's what we were talking about a while ago, is how to chronologically place where people were at different periods of time. Well, we got a pretty good indication in Kingsport. And the dates range from 4,850 years down to 320 years ago. So we kind of know where they were and what they were doing right here in town. And another thing that's I think's really helped us in our chronological sequence, 30 years ago, if somebody said early woodland, I would say 1000 BC to 300 AD. That was a time period. With all the work we've done, we can now divide that up. We can say the early part of that early woodland, 1000 to 700 BC, is what we call the upper valley projectile points, and there's some arrowheads that fit in that particular group. And after that, we have the Ebenezer cluster, and after that, the McFarland cluster. And the same thing with the pottery. 1000 to 700, we call the Swannanoa pottery series. Then we have a transition period called the Phipps period in between there, from 7 to 600 BC. From 600 BC to 300 AD, we have the Long Branch limestone tempered pottery. So you can see that not only do we just say early woodlands 1000 BC to 300 AD, now we've got divisions even in that time period. That's what we're trying to do, is establish who was where, what they're doing, and so forth. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get into some slides. And the archaeologist, the reason I've got these slides loaded, I haven't looked at them in a long time, but the archaeologist does not always have the same type of project that he can do on every site. As an example, one thing in archaeology we call salvage archaeology. You can see a site I did on Stone Drive. They were doing construction up there, and I had 10 days to dig that site out or it was going to be destroyed. So that's what we call salvage archaeology. The next thing I'll show you is on Patrick Henry Lake is what we call site survey reconnaissance. And the whole project is nothing but walking along and trying to record sites and where they are and let people know that they are there. And the third thing is what we call a phase 3 excavation, where you can actually do a full-scale excavation of a site and uncover it at your own leisure. So anyway, there's 3 different circumstances, and I thought that would be a good indication of what we do. What do you look for on archaeological sites to find a site? One of the things, you look for raw material. Raw material in this area, you're going to find the Knox black and gray flint, which weathers out of our limestone and dolomite. You can see this came out of the Eastman Rock Shelter, site number 40SL34. I dug 6 inches at a time, so we're talking about that square number C4, level 8, that's 4 foot in the ground. So there's some flint. That's one thing you'd look for if you're looking for a site. Another thing you'd look for would be, of course, the finished projectile points, or in this case, arrow points. One thing, this is also out of the Eastman Rock Shelter, that you look for is faunal material or bone, so you can identify what is their diet. I mean, is it fish, turtle, riverine type foods? This particular level, 4 feet in the ground, is almost exclusively white-tailed deer. You can see some of the molars and so forth. Another thing you look for to indicate a site would be charcoal. Several things you can do with charcoal. One is you can get a carbon date to know when they were there. Another thing you can do is identify what type of vegetation. If you can identify the wood, it'll tell you maybe about the climate. If it's fir and early wood, an old, back to the Ice Age that's not here anymore, you'd think that this was a real cold climate in here. So the vegetation might be able to even tell you what kind of vegetation is here. Shellfish. The shells that look like something you'd find on the ocean used to live in our river. It's called an Iospinosus. It no longer lives here. The river's a little bit too dirty for them. Mussel shells, of course, that was part of their diet. And also the periwinkles. They would be some sites we'd find that looked like they had a little stew or something. They'd have a bunch of periwinkles in one area. They'd probably boil those and got the gastropod out. This is something that most archaeologists know what they are, but the public doesn't know. If they go out in a place and they see all this broken rock around, this is what we call firecrack rock. These rocks came out of the Eastman Rock Shelter, out of a fireplace. And with these rocks, they cool off, they get heated again, and it's expansion and contracting. Eventually, they come apart. And what I've done, you can see where I've glued them back together because they were all in the same fireplace. But if you're walking along the ground and all you see is this broken firecrack rock, that's an indication there's a site there. You may not find any of the bone, pottery, flint, or anything else, but that would identify there's something going on there, just to find the broken rock. Another thing you might look for on a site is pottery or ceramics, but pottery was not invented in this area until about 1000 BC. So anything earlier than that, we're not going to find that, but anything after 1000 BC, we can look for pottery. This particular type is what we call long branch fabric mark. They wrapped a cord, rope around a paddle and actually slapped the design on the soft clay. The first project I want to go into is Patrick Henry Lake. I did it in 1986. I called I called the University of Tennessee, asked them if they were going to do any work out there. I had a full-time job, so I didn't know how much time I was going to have. Didn't know how long the lake was going to be down. Talked to Dr. Faulkner down there. He said that he didn't know it was down. I said, well, it's the first time it's been dropped, and nobody's ever done any archaeology work out there. So he called TVA and got permission from Bennett Graham for me to go out there and do the walk. Of course, everything was TVA property that was found. And you can see the report I just showed you that was written. But anyway, I was able to start walking that, and I was able to walk both sides of it before the water came back up. It was 10.4 miles on each side from Boone Dam down to Patrick Henry Dam. Some of it I didn't have to walk because it was a bluff, sheer bluff down to the river, so there was no place to walk. That's what's indicated in red there. I'm just going to take you, rather than doing that whole lake, which I couldn't do, I'm going to take you down just one short river bottom and just show you kind of what I saw. This is up at Smith Shoals, if any of you know where that area is, in Beulah community. Right under the bridge, you can see where an old spring used to come out. You can see where it's kind of washed the rocks out toward the river. When I started investigating the area, I found 2 net sinkers on the bottom, a chopping tool up on the upper right, some arrowheads, and some tools, or spear points and tool. But this site was pre-pottery, so what did they do? They carved their bowls out of stone. This is a piece of a soapstone bowl that came out of that section. Coming on down the river, Smith Shoals. Before I ever got to this area, I could see the Firecracker Rock 50 feet before I got there, so I knew there was a site there. When I went to the site, it was actually a pottery site, so it was later than 1000 BC. You can see I found another chopping tool and some more projectile points. When I got out on the lake, the bad part of it was that people had already been out there. That lake had been down 2 or 3 weeks before I ever started. But you can see where people had rode their 4-wheelers out there and had collected. In fact, I walked behind people actually picking up stuff. But I was trying to find every chip, every piece of pottery, and I was looking for something they really weren't looking for. They were looking for just arrowheads. But in this particular pile of Firecracker Rock, what's happened is this is probably a whole bunch of ground at one time, had all these fireplaces and hearths in it. The water's washed away all the dirt, and these rocks have just fallen. So it looks like a big cluster of rocks. That's probably maybe 8 fireplaces there, possibly. But in that, I found a big grooved axe, about 11 inches long. That was actually in that pile of rock that had deteriorated there. This is something that was real common on the lake. This is what we call expedient type tools. The people would pick up a piece of quartzite or hard rock. They would chip it to make just a point on it. They could open up the mussel shells. They could chop bones with it and so forth. They could throw them away and go from here to Knoxville and make another tool just like that in 5 minutes. That's what we call expedient tools. They're just things that are made on the spur of the moment for whatever they need to do, and then they go on. Going on down that Smith Shoals bottom, there's another little site there, some more pottery and some more projectile points. And here's coming down almost to the end of that bottom, and there's another cluster of Firecracker Rock on the left there. And not only was there a prehistoric site there, there was also a historic site. Now, somebody here may know what was there. I think it's actually in the report. But there was also a historical site there weathering out that bank. Going a little bit lower and getting into the bluff over here at Baker Bluff, you can see the Firecracker Rock again weathering out of the bank. And in that you can see all the pottery that was found. It goes back probably 1000 BC to 500 BC. Also found a deer tooth, white-tailed deer. Some spear points, and some tools. And you can see here what I was talking about, the sheer bluff coming down. So I didn't have to walk that. I think I've gone a little bit further in these slides. I think I went around the next bend to show you something. Yeah. Around the next bend, near Dorn Bluff, across from Dorn Bluff, this was an interesting place. It looks like there's 3 hearths or fireplaces here. Looks like they had just got up and left. They're still intact. You can still see the size of the hearth or the fireplace. That's one of them. The water's distorted a little bit, but it's pretty much still intact. And there's a second one. See how all the rocks are broken where they've been heated? And there's a third one. There was 3 of them there. And with those, of course, you'd find artifacts. Broken spear point, back into another spear point, another net sinker, and so forth, found there at that site. This is the shell pits I was talking about at Fall Creek Bridge in Warriors Path Park. We found 5 of these shell. It's the only places on the whole lake is actually where they had clam bakes. They were going out and getting mussel shells, dug a pit in the ground, probably put them in the fire, and they would crack open when they got hot. Some of the material that came out of that was a lot of shale, again the Io spinosa shale, and some bone fragments. And like I said, we got 2 dates on this, 4,500 and 4,900 years old. I wasn't allowed to do any digging out there. Like I said, I didn't get a permit from TVA. I was just doing a surface survey. So I had a fellow from the University of Tennessee come up. He had permission to do a trench in there, and we actually dug some of those shell pits were actually dug out and recorded. The only place that I was on the lake, Patrick Henry Lake, that I was probably the only person there, the first person there, is I walked up on one site down near 81 Bridge, before I got to 81 Bridge. I walked up on a little old knoll, which is probably the reason it was protected, because you had to walk way up a big cove to come back and find this little old piece of ground, bottom of a cliff. But since I was doing a survey, I didn't want to miss it, so I walked all the way up, walked over, and when I did, I found two axes. They got the blades up there. They're called salts. And then I found one grooved axe, and I found some arrowheads and stuff. But this is probably the material that was all over that lake. The first people that got out there probably found a lot of this type of stuff. Okay, that's the first project. It's called a site survey reconnaissance. That's all I'm doing. It's just walking, recording, and so forth. The second type site is salvage archaeology. Stone Drive, if you know where McDonald's is. And I saw construction going on there. I went and talked to the people at the trailer and asked them if I could go up there and look on top of the ground. I had found material there as a child in a garden. It used to be the Gibson's property. Went up and looked on top of the ground. That's what I picked up. So I went back to the trailer and I said, can I get permission to do a 1 meter square and go down, see if there was any kind of fireplaces, hearths, any subsurface features. And they got permission from their headquarters in Chattanooga. I got a letter. So I went up and did a 1 meter square just to see if there's anything underneath the plow zone, because the plow zone has been dug year after year and it's all disturbed. So I was trying to find something that's still intact. I dug a 1 meter square, and I knew what I did, it went right into a fireplace. I mean, charcoal, everything. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I got 10 days, because he said they were going to level this thing about 5 feet in 10 days. So I went and talked to the guy that was on the heavy equipment and asked him if he could come up there and push the topsoil off, because this had all been disturbed. I wanted to see what was under there that was undisturbed. When he did, well, here's just a picture of him pushing the topsoil off. When he did, look at the fireplaces showing up, these dark rings in the ground. So I knew that, see how obvious that is? See, it's in a yellow clay subsoil, and anytime they dug a hole in the ground and you've got all this charcoal in there, plus the dirt, the topsoil, once it filled it back in, it's a different color than the yellow subsoil. So you can see one of the fireplaces there. And there's another one. That's actually where a billboard post went in the ground. Used to be a big billboard there on that property, and that hole up there was where the post for the billboard had went in the ground. There's the original square that I found. You can see where I hit the edge of the fireplace. Well, here I've taken the fireplace out, and you can see the firecrack rock that came out of it. That's another one of those fireplaces there. And still another one. I think there was 11 of them altogether. All of them had something to date them by, with either arrowheads, charcoal, so forth. This is 40 SL, Tennessee, Sullivan County, the 17th site. That's the way the whole camp looked. They were camped right on top of that little knoll. And I went all the way around it, and everything was right there in the middle. They were right there on top of that little knoll. Just to make sure, I had the equipment operator come back up to Stone Drive and cut right at 20 feet off the road. He made another cut to make sure I didn't miss anything, and there was nothing else out there. So that's the way the site looked. In 10 days, this site got all the information from it. Sent some charcoal to the Smithsonian, and it came back. It was 4,085 years old. They were living there on Stone Drive. And that's what went in there originally. And today there's, what's down there? AutoZone, Little Caesars, so forth. Okay, that's the second project. That's what we call salvage archaeology. Now, one other one, this is what all archaeologists would like to have, is to go into a site, get permission from the owners, which I had to get permission from the Eastman, and be able to spend all the time there you wanted to excavate a site. This is the ideal site. It's at the head of Long Island. That's the cliff that Ray had mentioned. Used to call it the Big Rock. You can see the size of it by me standing down here on this sifted dirt. It's probably the reason it wasn't dug before I got there in '79 is it really doesn't look like a rock shelter. It doesn't have that roof right over your head. It's not real obvious, but if you look, that drip line is almost 20 feet out in front of there. When it rains, it comes down, but you got 20 foot of dry space here in the bottom. So I got permission, I went over, I started a 5 foot square. I'm digging down 6 inches at a time. First level will be level 1, level 2, and so forth. That slide's awfully dark. The only thing I can tell you about that is the top of it had a lot of alluvial material where the river had flooded, the yellow sand up there. That one whole square was getting so deep I couldn't get in and out very easily. So what I did, I went ahead and started I got 4 squares there, which is 20 feet, 5 foot on each one. And I'm going down to see what the depth of it is. In '79, I didn't really have a full-time job back then. And I just moved back from Florida, actually, in '79. And this is the first trench going north-south. And since I had time, I thought I'd go ahead and get going back toward John B. Dennis, do another trench. And that gave me a good east-west, northeast, southwest axis in there that I could actually see. Even though I didn't dig the whole site, I'd have a good indication pretty much what was there. Something I wasn't looking for was people being buried there. Of course, this is before the laws changed on digging burials in '87. This was in '79. I guess I'll point that out. But this is a flex burial I found in that trench. There's another picture of it. Once I took that one out, about 10 foot from it, I found another adult in a semi-flex position. And there is that particular burial, and you can see a fireplace showing up. Okay, you can see I'm starting to break up the large limestone rock up here with a sledgehammer and getting it out of there so I can continue digging. But underneath the other fireplace, you see the fireplace up there in the trench, that's where that one burial came out of. I came back about 15 foot and also found some more burials. Those were taken out. Here is a pretty good slide. You can see the levels I'm digging at, the 6-inch levels. At this time, it was like in October of '79, and I knew the weather was going to start changing. It was going to get colder, snow, and so forth. So my next project was to go ahead and take that upper end out. You'd almost see the tree line. That's the drip line, where the water actually drips pretty much when it rains or snows. So what I wanted to do was take that upper end out and get it all taken care of. Here you can see I've taken that upper end completely out. I've started working. I've got the big rock out, and I'm starting to work more in the middle of the shelter. When I took the upper end out, you can see I found 2 more burials up here. One of them was a small infant burial, and one was an adult. Kind of curious, it doesn't have a skull. Half of the pelvis is gone. Some of the vertebrae are missing, so I don't know if it was moved. Maybe an animal had gotten to the burial or so forth before it was brought back and put in a burial. It is in a burial position, in a flex position, so we really don't know what happened there. But that's that particular burial I just showed you. At this time, I've got the upper end done, so I'm going to jump back and get the back part. And there I've taken out part of it. You can see the leaves and so forth. It was probably probably December '79. And when I took the last piece of dirt out, or soil out, you can see I found some more burials. There was 3 in this one burial. Probably a 5 or 6 year old infant. Had about 300 shell beads with it. 1 adult and 1 newborn up on the top here. This is kind of interesting. Back that up, Collins, if you don't mind. Yeah. This particular one, the adult, you see that flint blade laying in the chest area. When I dug that out and was cleaning it, I noticed an arrowhead actually inside of the body. And it's right there, that little gray looking thing. That's actually an arrowhead that was shot in from the front, and it got lodged between the 9th and 10th ribs, and it did not go through the body. So that particular person was actually shot with an arrow. Okay, I've got all the, I'm below all the pottery levels, all the burials. Now I'm just going to go down and see what's below there. Okay, from the last slide, before I left, I wanted to see if there was anything below me before I left for the winter. And I took 1 square and I went straight down. I went to 7 feet, didn't find anything, sterile sand. Went down 7.5 feet, didn't find anything. At 8 feet, I found another living floor, 8 feet in the ground. So I knew I was going to have to come back the next year. So when I came back over about 2 or 3 weeks after I'd been digging, you can see where people started souvenir hunting, coming in there looking for arrowheads and so forth. The last thing I found before I left was a fireplace, and we found domesticated sunflower seeds in here at 2,300 years old. They were domesticating sunflowers. That's the way it looked when I came back in the spring. But I see where my hole was so I could go on. So I cleaned it up, and you can see I got the hole there. I found my other floor from the year before and started going on down to see what was below there. And this is, you can see I went on down, and I found another hearth down in the ground. This one ended up being 4,850 years old, that large hearth over there. And there you can see I'm going on down. There's a shovel handle up, there, and anyway, that's probably about 10-foot profile there. And there's the rock bottom. And and I knew it was at the bottom. That was 12 foot and 6 inches to ground. Real quick, I just want to, this is some of the pottery that was found. Archaeological sites are formed like a layer cake. You put down the first layer, that's the oldest one, the next one's a little newer, so forth. But when you dig it, you start from the newest and go to the oldest. So from the top of the ground, here's some real late pottery. And some projectile points. These are actually true Arab points. This is some pottery that's about 1,500 years old called a Radford. That's the shale beads and shale I found with the burial. This layer is particularly interesting, kind of where the spear thrower and the bow and arrow became invented. Look at the difference in the top row and the bottom row. It's kind of about where the bow and arrow was invented. These go back to, say, 8,000 to 10,000 years old. These are real early archaic. Also found the base of a Clovis point, that type points they found when they were hunting the mammoth, mastodon, and so forth. Also found one of those in there. And this was a project that somebody asked me about. I found three years ago. It's in Sullivan County. There's never been any sculpturing found in the whole eastern United States. There's never been any 3D sculpturing in cave art. In Sullivan County, I found this in a cave wall. See the human faces carved in it? I've had the UT up here and ETSU both been there. We found part of a burnt cane torch. We've got a date so far of 1600 AD, so that's 73 years before James Needham and Gabriel Arthur came through this area. And that's it. Now, I hope I got room. I got 10 minutes for some questions. That worked out pretty good. It's erosion. A lot of the stuff you find, like on Reedy Creek, a lot of the little knolls, there's really not much depth to them because it's all washed, and you don't find much depth to any site. That was what was unusual about that site on Reedy Creek. But that's what you call colluvial movement of soils.
I'm not really talking about how some of them get left up high. How do they get so deep?
Well, that's what.
Where you really don't expect dirt to be piling up on top of it.
Well, what's happened, when they dug the Little Tennessee River project at Tellico, they said that what Dr. Delcourt did at UT, he went in and took soil samples out of those bottoms and took soil samples off the mountains around there. And he said during the Ice Age, probably only 12,000 years ago, those bottoms were probably marsh. You know, all the ice was melting north and all this water was coming down. It was probably uninhabitable, the river bottoms where he found all the Cherokee sites and so forth. He checked all the mountains around there had a permafrost on them. It wasn't a glacier, but they were permanently frozen. There was no vegetation. When it started warming up, all the mountain soils didn't have any vegetation to hold back the soil, and all that came down and made the river bottoms that we see. So where you're talking about, I don't know, because it could be that happened in an area and then water rejuvenated and cut part of it out. See, I don't know what it looked like. We know what it looks like today, but yeah, there's a part of a mastodon found in Russell County. It was like 30 feet in the ground. So I know exactly what you're saying. I can't give you all the geology of it because I don't know.
What constitutes a site?
A site? That's any place that somebody has been to identify they've been there. Like I said, if it's been modified, if they've changed the ground in some way, if they've lived there, put a fireplace in, or state of Tennessee, if you find 10 artifacts on a site at a place, that's a site. That's what they recognize as a site.
What are the different kinds of aging tools and how accurate are they?
In archaeology, basically there's only two, well, three, I guess, if you use bone collagen, old teeth and so forth. You can do bone collagen dating, you can do carbon-14, and you can do what we call TL or thermoluminescence dating. And the Eastman Rock Shelter was the first site in the state of Tennessee that was used on. And basically what that is, real simple, Thermoluminescence is when something is heated, it drives off the free electrons out of the atom. When it's heated and when it cools down, it brings those electrons back in place. And basically trap light, luminescence. It's got, basically the light is trapped. Okay, if you come in today and take a piece of pottery and you crush it up, heat it to 500 degrees Celsius or 932 degrees Fahrenheit, you get it up to that point, then those electrons are released again, and they can measure between the last time it was released and this time. They got a measurement they go by. Called real accurate. Actually, I like it better because that piece of pottery, you're actually dating that actual item, that actual piece. If you found a piece of charcoal in a fireplace, was it washed from somewhere and ended up there? You know what I mean? It's kind of suspect. So thermoluminescence to me is better.
Plus or minus 100 years, 10 years, what?
It depends. The further you get away, if it was the cave 1600 and at near in Sullivan County, it's got the carvings. That date was like 30 years plus or minus. So, but it's late. Now, if you go back to the Ice Age site, they used bone collagen 19,100. It has a margin of error 800 years. So it could be 19,000, it could be 18,200, So it gets unreliable the further back you go.
On the Ice Age, what was this area like as far as the depths of the ice or what?
Okay, we did not have any glaciers in this area. We were in the area of permafrost in the mountains.
We didn't have any even
Do what?
none in the mountains around here.
No, we did not have any. There's some evidence of some ice on some of the boulders in the high mountains, like at Clingman's Dome, but probably it was frozen. It was basically it was a tundra. If you can look at the tundra in Canada today, it's the same thing. You've got that little frozen mist on the ground, snow. That's the reason I found caribou that Ray mentioned. I found 5 sites in Sullivan County that's got caribou. Well, they're a tundra type animal. They live in, and actually that was a record for the furthest south that ever been found. Was Sullivan County, and I found it at 5 different places. So they must have been. This might have been a border for the tundra, kind of in here. But no, there was no ice. It was pretty much cold, permafrost in the mountains, and maybe a frozen snow shallow on the ground. Don't know. They didn't leave. He's asking if there's any sites earlier than 13,000 years that we know of in Tennessee. The problem with that is they did not dig holes in the ground for the fireplaces, so they don't leave a lot laying out there. Everything was pretty much subject to what was on the surface. And there was no projectile points or flint points until the Clovis in this area or in Tennessee. So if they made their points out of bone or hardened wood or something, they didn't preserve. So chances are they are, but we don't have any. There's no way. We don't have a record of it. It means to say it that way. I wouldn't say that it's not though. Yes, ma'am.
Where are all of these artifacts that you found?
A lot of stuff's at Carnegie Museum. I found 14 Ice Age sites in this area. They made 3 trips down here in the summers with NSF grants to work. I got some stuff at the Smithsonian from Sullivan County. The shelter material is now at ETSU. It was at the University of Tennessee, and 6 months ago I went down with Dr. Franklin. We brought it back to ETSU, so it's local now, and we're talking that Gray might maybe doing a display out there eventually. So it's all, I don't have a collection basically. It's all the material goes with the project, you know what I mean, that was done. TVA has the stuff off of Patrick Henry Lake. Another project I just worked on this past winter, I walked Boone Lake. They dropped it an extra 14 foot. Since it was inundated in '53, this is the furthest, the lowest it's ever been. And I called TVA and asked them what they were going to do out there. And they said, well, we've contracted a fellow out of the University of Alabama to come up and do the TVA property. And I said, what about the private properties out there? And they said, we don't have any jurisdiction on private property. So I talked to Ted Wells down there, and kind of work with him. I was able to walk Boone Lake this past winter, not the TVA property, but the private-owned property, and we got 100 and I'm going to say 25 sites maybe, both historical and prehistoric. I was recording all the historical foundations. I got pictures of everything, got all the records. They don't have site numbers yet, but probably 125 new sites for Sutherland County. We already got over 400. Sutherland County has over 400 sites. That's including the prehistoric, historic, and the Ice Age sites. So we're over 400 right now, so we're going to have over 500 sites for Sutherland County alone.
At the big rock, you dug some deep holes. What did you do with the dirt you took out?
I sieved it out in front.
And what did you do with it?
I left it out there. It's still out there. I asked the Eastman if they want it covered back up, and they said no. If they wanted to, they had equipment to fill it back up, and they never did. So, any more questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a book or something that don't really go into the intimate details of all this stuff, but basically not necessarily for just Kingsport, but for this area that kind of just summarizes stuff without getting real deep? I'm not interested in that.
There's really not. I mean, there's particular papers on different projects, but nobody's ever sit down and put. In fact, that's what I'd like to do one day, is just do a prehistory of Upper East Tennessee. Sorry. A lot of them are unpublished. A lot of them are in archaeological journals and so forth. So, any particular one that you're okay. I would call the Department of the Division of Archaeology. They're under the Department of Environment and Conservation in Nashville, and ask them what's available on Long Island. That's where I actually got 2 of my reports. And if you need to mention my name, I know some of the people out there. So, but yeah, it's there's a lot of information, prehistoric information. Of course, historic also on Long Island.
SD, tell them about 2 things. The book on writing about arrowheads.
Okay.
And also about the pamphlet that you published with the Tennessee Eastman and University of Tennessee about the Big Rock.
Okay, that's some of the articles that I mentioned here.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned to Ray, what I've been doing is working on a book on arrowheads or projectile points for the Upper Tennessee Valley, because we don't know what's up here. I do. I know some and some of the other archaeologists, but I went down to the University of Tennessee and talked to a retired professor. I made 4 trips to see 2 different people, and going through all these projectile points and asking them about, I'm seeing points that don't show in any record being in this East Tennessee Valley, but they're in West Virginia, Northern Virginia, Southwest Virginia, but not down in here. I'm finding all these different points, and their explanation is, well, you're up there in that valley that nobody really knows what's up there. So I'm like, somebody needs to do a publication to identify what we've got up here. So what I did, I put all the points in alphabetical order that I could find. If I didn't have the point, I actually put a picture in. And I've got, of course, now I got an overkill. I'm going to have to start taking points back out now that if I don't find any documentation. But I've actually got 175 different points right now. So eventually I'll have that. Next year I should have that done. It'll be available. My biggest problem is whether to do it just the name of the point, the age, and so forth for a collector. But I've got all this research material where I can actually do a research book, which would be more better for students and so forth.